Welcome, everyone, to Women of the Military podcast. I'm really excited to have Jen here today to talk about her story in the military. So, welcome to the show, Jen.
Thanks, Amanda. Good to be here.
So, we're going to start with why did you decide to join the military?
It was kind of a crazy story. I decided to join the military. It was kind of on a whim. My friend was working in a restaurant with me. She had a recruiter coming by, and I was all set to join the Peace Corps. And the recruiter started talking to me, and I said, you know what? Gosh, that sounds wonderful. I always wanted to travel. I wanted to get out of Florida, and I took that opportunity. And I'm the one that ended up going in. She never went in, and we still laugh about it these days. So.
Oh, you're still connected with her?
Yeah, and went to high school together, and saw her at the last reunion I went to. So.
That's funny. So you're like, oh, let's do it. Yeah, let's do it. And then she's like, never mind. Whose idea was this?
So it's kind of funny looking back because that changed my whole life, that moment right there.
Yeah. How did you decide which branch you were going to join?
So that's another funny story. I wanted to go into the Air Force, but the Air Force recruiter was really hard to track down. I guess they had met their quota or what have you. So I kept trying going to the recruiting station. Nothing against the Army, but I wanted to go Air Force. And I didn't swim, so I didn't feel too keen on the Navy, even though I have Navy family, so the Army was the way to go, I guess.
That's awesome. So it's the recruiter, he just wouldn't answer your call, so you switched to the Army. And then how did you pick what job you were going to do?
Well, so from the beginning, I wanted to be a journalist. That's all I wanted to do was go into communications. I was going to go to University of Florida down in Gainesville. University of Florida, UF. That was the plan. And then they thought communications, oh, yeah, let's have her go into radio communications, which was a totally different thing because I had a high score on the ASVAB for electronic stuff. And that did not turn out to be the path I wanted. I eventually got to be a journalist, but yeah, so that's how all that happened.
All right. That's an interesting story. They're like, it's got communications in the name. And you're like, oh, okay. And then they're like, no, this is not what I wanted.
So I've been a writer since 9 years old. And so that's all I ever wanted to do.
That's awesome. Mm-hmm. So tell us about basic training. You headed off basic training. You were supposed to go with your friend, but then it was just you. So what was that experience like?
Honestly, I was terrified. I woke up the first night and I'm lying in my bed and I was just like, what did I do? I was not sure I was doing the right thing, but it just seemed like a good direction. I couldn't afford college at the time, and it just seemed like exciting, like an adventure. So there I was, and I almost didn't make it. I almost didn't get all the push-ups in. Then I got back in line, and somehow, as fate would have it, I got to join the Army.
Okay, so you were close to not completing boot camp because you needed to do enough push-ups? Is that what was going on?
Yeah, so when I came in, I had never done a push-up in my life, and I wasn't having an easy time of it. I was a really good runner, and sit-ups were no problem, but push-ups took a little bit, but I kept working on them, and I got there.
That's awesome. Yeah, that sounds like me when I first started the military stuff. Like, I was a really good runner, and sit-ups weren't really a problem. I had to, work at it to get better, but it wasn't like I had never done them. And then push-ups, I think I had done them like once ever in my life for like a PEE test that they had made us do, and I was like thinking I could do them on my knees, and it was like you have to do them on your toes, and it was really challenging, and it took a lot of time to build up the strength to be able to do them.
Yeah, I was lucky. They had something called Fitness Training Company, and I don't like to admit it, but I had to go there and I had to go through that remedial stuff. And but then I was doing push-ups pretty well after that. So thank goodness for that.
So was that the biggest challenge you faced during basic training?
I think I just was really, honestly, it was my first experience with anything really tough like that. I had strict parents, so I really never dated, never really got out and did anything in the world past school, except maybe I worked. Um, I did a little bit of modeling when I was in high school, at like the local mall, and I worked at a fast food restaurant. That was it. I had no life experience, so coming into basic training and having to do all the things that you have to do and having to follow all those parameters, I just felt a little like, what am I doing? And I don't know if this is for me. And during the time, that's when we were in, I think it's when we were in Kosovo or Bosnia. And they would talk about it like when we were at the dining facility, the drill sergeants would say, yeah, you're going to get shipped off to one of those places. And I was like, oh my God, I was going to join the Peace Corps. What am I doing? But, it ended up being the best decision of my life. And I don't regret it at all.
Oh, that's awesome. I love hearing that. I love when people say that. And I mean, the military has so many positive aspects. Sometimes there's some difficult things, but it it does have such a positive impact on so many people's lives. So it's really great to hear that was your experience as well. So you probably graduated basic, then you went to AIT to learn about radio communications, which is not like journalism.
Right.
And so what was that experience like?
It went pretty well because I had a good technical aptitude. I've always been really good with stuff like that, and I ended up being into computers. When computers came around, because I'm a little bit older, they didn't have. Yeah, they had computers, but they weren't too far ahead when I came in.
Right.
I did really well with that, but it definitely wasn't what I wanted to be doing. I went to Fort Gordon, Georgia for the training, and then I went to Fort Campbell, Kentucky. And yeah, it was all around the wrong MOS, but I got through it and I think it helped. It helped with the technical skills on the resumes.
So how long were you in that MOS and were you able to switch to journalism or public affairs is what the military likes to call it?
Yeah. Yeah. So I was only in that MOS after I trained, it was about a little over 3 years. And I did that because I was like, I had 2 years. I was on some kind of 2 years reserve, 2 years active. And then I got out for a while, actually, in 1995, because just some personal stuff I had to deal with. And then I was out for 3 years, and it's the darndest story. I ran into a recruiter's wife when I was at the tailor shop in Florida, and it was the same place that GI Jane was filmed. Near that barber shop, but it was the tailor shop, and I was in there, and I always like to make small talk with people. And I was talking to the lady, and she said, "My husband's a recruiter," and she said, "I know he can get you that MOS." That was basically her spiel, and I was like, "Okay, like I want to be a journalist. I've always wanted to do this." And sure enough, he uh, he was able to get me back in, and then I went to a mobile public affairs detachment. Um, I'm getting my dates and stuff mixed up.
That's okay.
No, but I came back in to be a journalist. Yeah. I went to the Mobile Public Affairs Detachment in Florida, and then I ended up getting to go to DINFOS, which is, I just happen to be wearing this today, Defense Information School. They call us DINFOS trained killers, and it's at Fort Meade, Maryland. So that's where I
And
got
it's
to do my training.
And DINFOS is where all branches of the military go for public affairs training, so it's kind
Correct.
of cool because everybody gets to go to the same place, and I've talked to people who've gone there and they're like, "Yeah, I got to connect with people from other branches and, like, start building my network," and I think it's pretty cool that there's one spot for everybody to go, and, just because it builds, like, rapport within the military in a way that normally isn't done, and all I've heard is good things about going to that school. Like everything people learn is what you need to know to be a journalist and it's relevant and it's always changing and it's just been I've only heard good things. So
Oh, yeah.
I'm jealous that you got to go. Even though
Oh,
that wasn't my career. Well,
it was a lifetime opportunity. And I got to go back recently. They were having the 60th anniversary, and that's where I got the shirt. But I linked up with some colleagues again, and they gave us a little. brief on like, how they've been doing more innovative things. And we talked a little about AI and wow, it was really something. And I'm glad I got to go.
Yeah, that sounds really cool.
Hmm.
Yeah, and that's example of, like, the stuff that you learned is different than what they're teaching today, and they are, like, always changing it, and that's what I've
Totally.
always heard from different people that I've interviewed who have gone, to Denfos about, like, how it was the most current the military, sometimes you think stuff gets stuck, but they're, like, on the cutting edge of making sure that the right stuff is being taught to their t I was gonna say the
Always.
airmen, the service members.
Very cool. Yeah. I loved it. And I get a little crazy about just talking about it. I get passionate.
That's awesome. So what year was it when you went back in? You said 98? Is that what you said?
Yeah, I went back in 98 and then I got that training. And it was literally like, I was in the National Guard. So that training is, you have to be activated for that, obviously. Or the other way you could do it at the time was correspondence courses. And they just happened to have a slot because we were getting ready to deploy. And they were like, "Do you want to go?" And I had just gotten my new apartment in Jacksonville, Florida. And I was like, "Oh, and I have a job." But they were like, "You have to decide now." That's the thing with the military. Like, you don't always get that lead time. And I was
Right.
like, "Oh, I want this so bad. I've always wanted it. Let's do it." And I made the decision on the phone call right there late at night. And then I had to get friends, pack up my apartment, and kind of leave my life behind for a while. But so worth it. I'll never regret that.
So it sounds like when you finished training, then you went to a deployment pretty quickly after that?
Yeah, because I got back. I did the training in '99. Yeah, I got back July '99, and then yeah, it was like 3 or 4 months, about 3 months later that we shipped off, and I didn't end up getting to go downrange to Bosnia. I was in Germany. I kind of was like support. I was doing media analysis with the MPAD there, which is, well, Mobile Public Affairs Detachment. And so I didn't get to what I thought was the cool mission, but I ended up getting the media analysis experience, which took me into a civilian job. So it was cool though. Germany was amazing.
Yeah. Well, and it is I mean, there's, like every part of the military is important, and I think a lot of times we only think about the people on the front lines or out in the field, but then there are these jobs that you need to do back, home or overseas with, like, our partners where you're closer, and so that's kind of it's cool that you got to deploy to Germany too, because 'cause I'm like, that just sounds like fun.
It was, and then I loved it so much. I went and came back on active duty. I left the guard, came back on active duty, and lived there for another 3 years, and eventually got my deployment experience. I got plenty of that. So
You're like, "Don't worry, there's more
hmm,
story to
there's
tell."
more. There's some for
Okay.
everybody.
So you came back home, and while you were there, you decided, I like this. I wanna stay active duty." And so did you start the process of switching from guard to active duty before you got home, or was it after you got back?
It was after I got back.
Okay.
I came home. Honestly, I left Germany, and it was something like my heart was there. There was just some kind of connection to just the way of life. And I came home to Jacksonville, and it was just all strip malls and stuff. And I was like, no, like I want to go back over. I've got to experience more of Europe. And so, what an opportunity.
That's awesome.
Mhm.
So you went back active duty and you were able to go back to Germany. Did you go back to the same, base that you were at, or was it a different base in Germany?
It was
Or
different. Like
fort?
when we first went over, I was in Heidelberg,
Okay.
which is really pretty, and I ended up in Würzburg after that. But at first, when I went on active duty, they were going to ship me to Bosnia. And this time, I didn't want to go to Bosnia. I wanted to go back to Germany. And so at the time, I was seeing somebody, and we ended up getting married so that we could be together in Germany. So
I see. So you went to Germany, newly married, but married I mean, you guys were dating, but you got married so you could get stationed together.
yeah, we literally got married at down in South Carolina at the was it
Justice
Columbia,
Center.
South Carolina, where the place where we were like, getting ready to ship out from to go to Germany. Mhm. So it was kind of like, ooh, let's take a U-turn, or not a U-turn, but a zigzag so we can get
Right.
there. And so it was interesting.
Yeah. So you ended up in Germany, and what were you doing, like, work-wise? You still public affairs, but what were you doing?
I was editing the Judy First magazine, along with along with the editor there. Um, and that was a full color magazine for the First Infantry Division. And that was really amazing too. The Big Red One has a lot of history. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but the Big Red One in the Army has been, to my knowledge, if I remember correctly, first everywhere except for in the Korean conflict. And so there's a lot of first in the Big Red One, First Infantry Division, and there's a lot of honor and history. And so that was really cool.
And such a cool opportunity. I think one of the coolest things about many of the career fields in the military is how much like responsibility and hands-on learning you get to do, that normally you would have to like work, for years to be able to do a certain job, and you're like, you know, a few years into being into the military as a public affairs specialist, and they're like, "Here, you get to do this," and you're like, "Wow, this is awesome!" But like in the
Yeah.
civilian world, it's like only a few people get to do that, and you have to be like really high up, and so
Hmm.
that sounds like so cool that you got to do that.
It was really exciting because, okay, the cameras look really old now. Like we had the cameras with the huge battery packs when I went to Dinfos. But they were innovative at the time.
Right.
And here you are, you're a soldier, and they just throw you this equipment, this camera, and you get to go out and talk to people from all over. I mean, I was there after Hurricane Katrina when I was with the Guard, and I mean, I get to see so many like cool things. I mean, some of it was really tragic, of course, and just crazy stuff, And we got to fly over in the helicopter, and so you don't just see like the piece that the soldier normally sees. It's like you're way up there and you're seeing like the whole bird's eye view sometimes. So that makes it pretty fascinating.
Yeah. So, and based on like the years, uh, it seems like we're getting closer and closer to September 11th. We were in Germany when September 11th happened. Is that correct?
Yes, yes, I was. And I'll never forget that because it was like a gorgeous day. And I was in Bavaria in the southern part. And my leadership at the time was like, they were like, yeah, just, leave out a little early. And it was beautiful. And I was getting ready to go home, uh, where where I lived with my husband off the base. And we had a little place there. And I wasn't even all the way home. And I got a phone call and they're like, come back now. And I was like, sounds like, that doesn't sound like normal. That sounds really serious. Like, I don't know. They couldn't even tell me what was going on because they didn't actually know. It was just like, you know how it was, like everything was
Yeah.
happening and people were trying to figure it out. And so that was afternoon for us, obviously. And so it made it a different experience. And turned the car around, got back, and everybody's watching CNN Europe and just staring at the screen. And I'm like, what's going on? And then, I mean, it was like right after, it was like the same day, I think. Everyone was on guard duty, and we would be out there for maybe 12 hours just standing in our gear and didn't know, we didn't know what was happening, if someone was going to attack the base. I mean, nobody really knew at that point. And I was sleeping on this girl's floor because they didn't have enough room for us in the barracks, and I couldn't go home. I couldn't leave the base, and they would just randomly knock on doors and, hey, it's your turn, or until they had the roster all made up. And so that was not a fun time, and then we couldn't do any more traveling through Europe. That part was pretty much over at that point.
Okay. Because it like locked everything down, and you guys
Hmm.
were, wow.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting to hear people because based on, like, where you were in the world, the time of day, because like,
Yeah.
it I woke up because I was on the West Coast, and the radio was playing, like, it wasn't playing music, and it was like these and it was like a radio station that only played music, and they were talking, and they were, like, freaked out, and I was like, "What's going on?" And it was, like, right after, one of the first towers had been hit, and they were still trying to figure it out, and, like, I remember waking up and being like, "Something's wrong," and even though, like, I was, cause my radio would turn on as my alarm clock, and I was like, "Something's wrong," and I was a senior in high school, and I already knew something was wrong, and I don't even know it didn't even know what they were talking about till I walked down the hallway and, like, saw my parents, and then they were like, "This is what's going on," so, it was
Oh,
kinda
yeah.
crazy.
That must have been wild,
Yeah.
especially being in high school. And I remember being 19 before I joined the Army when they were, I think it was when I was, maybe I was 18, or I was still in high school, I think. And that's when, Desert Storm's the first one, right?
Mhm.
Desert Storm was happening, and I was terrified because I wasn't in the military. My parents weren't in the military, so I heard about it and thought, gosh, what's going on in the world? Is that going to come here? I mean,
Right.
it was a scary time. So I can kind of, you
Really,
know,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's interesting just to hear the different stories, and just to being, like, international and how everything changed for you guys, like, immediately because, like, no more travel and you're working instead of working your job, you're working, these 12-hour shifts, and that
Hmm.
I mean, that just seems like it's like night and day, everything changed and you had no warning. You're, like, about to go home and get some rest, and then it's like, "Nope, gotta go back to the
Yeah,
base."
definitely.
So,
But there was camaraderie there. At least I remember some good people I was stationed with, and people would run out and get coffee for each other, or like just try to keep some normalcy. And so I had some people in the unit that at least I knew that we had each other's backs, and
yeah.
that was nice.
Yeah. So you said that you deployed. Did you come back from Germany before you deployed, or did you deploy out of Germany?
Yeah, I came back from Germany. Let's see. So the first time I deployed, I was in the Wyoming Guard. Well, actually, it was 111th Press Camp Headquarters. So that was based out of Nebraska, but Wyoming, was one of the parts of that. Yeah, way out west. That's when I first went to Iraq, and I went as part of a four-person team. And basically, our job there was we were working for the employer support for the Guard and Reserve, and we were going out and writing the stories of the service members there, not just Army, but all the services. That was really cool because I really got to get the soldier's perspective, the sailor's perspective, just the regular people doing their jobs. And we were reporting, we were doing those stories so that they could go back to their civilian employers, these stories. And the
Oh, okay.
civilian employers could use them in their newsletters or what have you. And they could see what their employees were doing as service members when they were deployed. So that was, I don't know, it was pretty special to me to get to meet all those people.
Yeah. So it also sounds like you switched back to National Guard when you moved back to the States.
Yeah,
Is
I
that
flip-flopped. I was
you were
definitely
like, "Ah, let me
some
see
active,
what my."
some guard. Yeah, it
Yeah.
just depended on, where I wanted to go and what was going on. Um, okay, I guess that was it.
And then you deployed another time? Is that what you said?
Yeah, I deployed in 2011, and that was when I was with the Baltimore unit. I was also with the Maryland Army National Guard, and I was in the 29th Mobile Public Affairs Detachment, and we went over during. So the first one was under OIF, but this was Operation uh, New Dawn,
Okay.
the drawdown,
Right.
and so we went over there then, and it actually only ended up being 9 months, but I got to be down in Baghdad, and then I ended up going up near Tikrit and doing media analysis because I had the civilian experience and they needed somebody. So that was pretty interesting.
Yeah. Wow. So it sounds like most times when you talk to someone who's in the guard, they're usually like in the same, at least in the same state, sometimes the same unit for their whole career. But it sounds like you moved around a lot. Was that just like personal, like finding jobs, or how did you end up moving all all over the world when you were in the
I
National Guard?
I really think it was just, I don't know, it was just those things that just happened. And when I saw the opportunities, I just said, wow, I want to do that. The four-person team that I was on, we had two Air Force, one officer, and then we had Air Force enlisted, and then I had a sergeant that I was with, Sergeant First Class from the Army. So it was just four of us, and we actually went into Afghanistan for about a week, and then we went to Kuwait, and we were in Iraq and different places. And it was just like the wildest thing, like I'd never done, because we had to figure out our own travel arrangements, and we just kind of like, yeah, had to do all that stuff. And so it wasn't like we were, I mean, we were in CENTCOM, Central Command,
Right.
uh, and there was support and such that we could reach out for, but we were kind of like our own little unique team, and it was
Yeah.
really, it was a wild experience.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds just, like, so cool to be, like, this tiny little team, and then, like, capturing stories of people who are overseas, and then I like the mission behind it of, like, sending it back to the employers so the employers know what their employees are doing overseas and then how it could be used. It sounds so cool. I love public affairs. I
I
like
do too. It's the best job in the military, I think. And I got asked to be on that team. Uh, I don't remember if the opportunity just came up and I expressed an interest, or if they actually reached out to me. But they were looking for a captain at the time, and at the time, I think I was in E5 then. Wait, I should have written all these dates down.
it's
At
alright.
the time, I was enlisted, and because I had certain experience, they wanted me to join, and I was really excited about that. So,
Yeah, that's really cool. I think
mhm,
that's kinda cool about the Guard too, because they can, like, look at your civilian, certification and say, "Oh, well, you have X, Y, and Z," and, like, even though and usually even in active duty side, a lot of times they're like, "We need a body that can do this, and there's a rank attached to it, but we'll move around to make it work
mhm.
so that we have a person who's the right qualifications." So that's really cool.
Yeah,
So
it was.
so, besides your deployments, is there anything else from your career, like at home station, that you got to do that you really want to talk about?
I mean, there have been various things. I mean, being in the Maryland Army National Guard, in this area, I want to say, was it maybe 2009 or something? We had the snow apocalypse,
Oh, I remember that. Yeah.
um, or Snowmageddon. I don't know what they were calling it, but it was really bad. Like on 695, the highway in Baltimore, you could just look where there are usually cars everywhere in traffic. There was nothing. I have a picture somewhere where there was just snow, and there was just everybody was snowed in, So that was pretty cool. Just being in the Humvees and running around Baltimore and just trying to help people and just trying to capture what was going on. There've just been some little things like that that were way cool after Hurricane Katrina. Just feeling like you could make a difference. Feeling
Yeah.
like you're in that position where you could.
Yeah, I was talking to someone yesterday. Her interview was last week for the podcast, but she's still in the National Guard, and she was telling me like they did COVID response and they did this and they do that, and I think sometimes we forget all the things the National Guard is doing because either it doesn't affect our lives, or when it does, it's just like, "Oh, well, of course they're gonna do it. They're the National Guard." But it's like, "No, but these are real people with real lives, and they're, like, doing all these different things." And so I think it kinda highlights how important the National Guard is and why why we need it and why it's there.
Mhm.
And the National Guard, especially after 9/11, was doing both ends. They were deploying a lot, and then they also were still doing humanitarian response and the response that they needed to do in the States, and so I feel
Definitely.
like so important to highlight these stories, yeah.
Yeah, because in the past, the National Guard, I think people would think, oh, the National Guard, they're just weekend warriors, and they're I think people had a belief like they're overweight, they're out of shape, they just
Right.
they get together, maybe they get together and drink or something. I mean, I remember just kind of getting those stereotypes in my head, but it was nothing like that. Like we were busy and we got deployed, and we had to just be like the active duty, and we had to, if there was something we needed to know, we had to catch up. And
Yeah.
but I didn't have those experiences of just sitting around doing nothing. And we brought our civilian skills, which, as you mentioned before, that was awesome. Not only that, we had more camaraderie because we had lived in the same area. You know, some of us might have even worked near one another, worked together on jobs, civilian jobs, and some of us may have been, you know, friends. I mean, I had friends in the unit that we would hang out sometimes, and so I think there was more trust and more connection, and so I think that made us very strong.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds awesome. Yeah, I feel like I was like, "Man, we could talk for, like, a whole 'nother hour about all the things that you got to do." But unfortunately, we don't have that much time.
Yeah.
But, what was it like to you're not in the National Guard anymore, are you?
No, I retired 10
Okay,
years ago,
that's
almost to
what
the day.
So, what was that transition? I know for National Guard people, it's sometimes really different because it's not like going from active duty because you already have a civilian job. But I've also heard that there still are challenges. So, what was that experience like for you?
Um, So for me, honestly, I felt like I was part of a family when I was with my National Guard unit. And it was extremely hard when I left because I saw those people every weekend and I was very connected to the unit. And I didn't see a lot of them that much after that. Like they tried to have one reunion where everybody got together, and I don't really know why, but we really didn't have a lot more of those. And so for me, it was just, well, leaving the military period was just like this feeling of disengaging from this family. And okay, sometimes the family in parts was dysfunctional, and every experience wasn't positive, but I was really honestly depressed and very sad afterward. I didn't expect that. Um, I cried a lot and I felt alone. Even though I had a civilian job, it just wasn't the same connection. Um, and I've, of course, gotten past that. And I've connected with the military community, you know, through all these organizations they have now, like Wounded Warrior Project and such. Um, but yeah, it was hard. It was hard because I kind of grew up in the military, if you think about it. I joined at 19, and yeah, I think it was difficult, but I have such great memories and connections, and yeah.
Yeah, I think it the emotional I think when you talk about, like, I'm switching from one job to another job and, like, I'm getting out of like, that part of the military and I think that's a lot of where the initial, like, TAP problem was the focus was, like, "Find a job," and
Mm,
it's like,
mhm.
that's not where the, like, challenge of being a veteran
Yes.
is for most people, it is for some, but it's that emotional piece of, like, having this community, having these connections, and then it's like, poof, it's gone, and you're like, "What just
Yes.
happened?" And you
Oh
mentioned,
my
like, getting
gosh.
connected with the veteran community. That's what I've found for me to be the solution is to connect with other veterans, get involved in, other military related groups so that I don't feel so lonely because, I mean, that's exactly how my situation was too, like, I wasn't going to work, I was going to be a stay-at-home mom, and so when I lost my, my career and then also, what I wasn't expecting was losing all that community and connection, and that was
Oh
really, really
goodness.
hard.
Goodness, I
Yeah.
identify with that because see, I had my daughter right before I got out. So I wasn't ready to retire. I actually wasn't going to retire that early. I just loved, I loved being in the guard. But at the time, I had a health condition come up after having my daughter. I mean, I'll say it, it's just my thyroid, And I was struggling a lot. And then I had my daughter, but I didn't have anybody to care for my daughter. And I was trying to go to drills, and someone in the unit was like, you know what, you've done your time. And I thought it sounded good at the time. I was like, yeah, it'll be easier and everything. But you know what? I was going through postpartum and I was getting out, and it was really, really a tough time. And so I
Yeah.
identify with what you're saying. It must have been like incredibly hard.
Yeah. No, yeah, I think
Mm,
we had, like, very different experiences, but also, like, so similar that we can really relate to each other, yeah. Because it's like you're going through this, like, huge dramatic change of, like, becoming a mom and all the
mhm.
emotions and all the things that come with that, and then you're
Yeah.
losing the part of who you are that you really loved, and then it's, like, gone. And that was, like, the same thing, like, logically on paper, it made sense for me to get out of the military because, like,
Mhm.
deployments, my husband was in the is still in the military, like, it was an easy, logical decision, but then when you take the emotions in, it becomes, "Oh, this isn't quite quite what I expected." So, yeah, I really
Exactly.
relate to that.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow. You're preaching to the choir. And actually, if I may mention, I'm trying to use my writing now. I'm working on starting basically life story writing coaching. And what I want to focus on, I think what my heart really tells me I want to focus on are women veterans in transition. Probably someone like you or like me who's getting out of the military, who's maybe a mom or just a woman veteran. And I want to do something with that. So I'm still ironing that out, but I want to help people write about those transitions and those themes in their life. And that can help them to heal. Because it's something I went through when I had breast cancer, and I went through a class like that. And now I'm actually next month getting certified so that I can do that.
Yeah, I that sounds great because I think that when you talk about things and when you have a support group of people who've gone through a similar thing, it makes you not feel so alone. And like I felt like I was transitioning wrong because I wasn't going into the workforce, and so I figured that was why I was having so much trouble. And then I like started talking to other veterans and realized, no, this is like normal. Your
Yeah.
situation is pretty unique compared to like most male veterans, but they would have the same emotions and the same feelings. And so then I was like, oh, it's not that I did it wrong, it's just that it's normal to have
Yeah.
emotions. And so,
Yeah,
yeah,
there really needs to be a way to bridge that gap a little better. We need all the support we can get when we're doing that because
yeah,
we're letting go of everything. I mean, it's our whole identity,
yeah,
and you are taking on a new identity, and at the same time you're letting the other identity go. And yeah, I totally get that.
yeah, that sounds really awesome. So, that's really cool. If you and you gotta keep us updated if something comes up, we can add it to the show notes or we can add
Great.
it to the blog post at any time. So just keep me updated on that. And
Sure.
then I always like to end the interview with what advice would you give to a young woman who's considering joining the military?
Um, that's a hard one because I kind of just fell into things and kind of jumped. I would say, oh my goodness. Is there another way I can, maybe you could
You're like,
phrase that
just do
better?
it, just do it.
I would
Some
say it's
people
a
say that.
wonderful opportunity. Yeah, don't wait too long, don't let life get in the way, but make sure you get the MOS that you want, and, make sure you really research that beforehand. And recruiters, obviously, there's some really good ones out there, but, they have to make a quota, so make sure you've you've mapped that out for yourself and you've looked at your, I don't know, like your core values and your interest and all those things, and found out what kind of job you really wanna do that's gonna meet your goals.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I wrote a book called The Girl's Guide to Military Service, and it's all about like figuring out where the right place for you in the military is. So I totally agree. And recruiters, yes, they're doing their job and they work for the military. They don't work for you, and so that it's more important that you have your best interests at heart and do the research that you need to do. And so my book's out there. There's YouTube videos. There's so many resources to help young women who are considering joining. Well, thank you so
It's
much for your
awesome.
time. Thank you for your
Thank
service.
you.
Thank you for sharing it. I'm really glad we got to do this interview.
Thank you, Amanda. It was wonderful. I enjoyed it. Thanks.